it's a reflection of the crisis that was created by the Wall Street crash in 2008 and rapidly became a global crash in most parts of the world, not so much in China and Russia. And at the same time, it is a crisis of the democratic functioning of capitalist states in Europe and North America. This we can see very clearly now. As for the economic crisis, every serious commentator noticed that the Chinese economy had not done so badly. In fact, had done rather well. And to a lesser extent, also the Russians. And this, of course, caused problems amongst the strategic think tanks of the United States, largely, because that is the dominant part. The Europeans basically do its bidding and do what it wants. And you could see in the 2009, 2010, a growing distaste of these two sovereign states, which are China and Russia. So add to that the Middle Eastern wars that took place. What became very clear was that US imperial strategy, which is both political and economic, was to try and break up the big states which had sovereignty. Whether you agree with these states or not is a different matter. These states had sovereignty. Their policies were determined by their own ruling elites, not by the United States. And the aim in the Middle East was to break these countries up, turn by turn. So they did it with Iraq. They did it with Syria. They did it with Libya. And Libya, in some ways, is the worst situation of what NATO accomplished, supposedly, creating a total crisis on every single level, which we can see to this day. And then they thought and began to discuss how we're going to deal with Russia and China. In terms of dealing with the Russians, for them, it was a question of provocation, NATO expansion, breaking all serious negotiations with the Russians to reach some sort of an accommodation, the ultimate result of which is the Ukraine war. I mean, we can attack Putin, and we all attack Putin. It's not a big, difficult thing to do. But you cannot say that it is Putin's responsibility alone. As many US commentators, including in the New York Times, are writing, we knew if we carried on doing what we do, the Russians would react, but still we did it. So the United States shouldn't try and get out of their responsibility. And since then, of course, they are not 100% sure what to do. There are 300,000 NATO troops going to be based in Eastern Europe, and no doubt some in the Ukraine, because even if the Ukraine wasn't a member of NATO, NATO was in the Ukraine. Otherwise, you can't understand many of the things that are going on now politically and militarily. So yes, I would say that the big impact of the economic crisis and the political crisis we can now see in these parts of the world. It's not the same as Europe was after the First World War, not the same. Because then you had different imperial powers fighting each other, and some of them collapsing. Now you have the dominant power, which is the United States, and it is backed by Western and Eastern Europe. I mean, the United States is not weak, in my opinion. That's a misjudgment. It is quite strong so far. That's a key point we have to understand. And as far as democracy is concerned, we now see what I have described in other essays as an extreme center, which unites in many countries, the center right and the center left, or the center left becomes the center right. And then you have a far right developing in all these countries. So it's a mess. It's a complete and utter mess. But I am very strongly of the opinion that this is a war not simply to defend their own economies. This is a war of US hegemony, to hegemonize these countries so they can use them for their own purposes, as they do in the Middle East, as they do with parts of Western Europe as well. And Russia and China don't fit in. I mean, can you imagine the Russians, both Yeltsin and Putin, asked to become members of the European Union and NATO? They asked for it. Why? Because they genuinely did want to be integrated in the American-led capitalist system, but they were rejected because Russia was considered too strong a power. And the Americans were very nervous that if Russia was allowed into the EU or NATO, a German-Russian pact would become inevitable, which would reduce American power in Europe. They think like that, and rightly so, because that is what would have happened, probably. So the Russians were kept out. Now they've been made into an enemy again. They've done this. The Russians have responded in a reckless, adventurous way. And we now have to ask the question, is the struggle for US hegemony going to be fought with the last Ukrainian? Because any sane person knows that to prolong the war rather than negotiate is going to cost Ukrainian lives, Ukrainian cities, etc. And that is what NATO is pushing, or the United States is pushing so far. So we're in a very serious situation. It's not a joke situation. And the many commentators are saying we could see the use of nuclear weapons in Europe. Well, we could. I mean, that is the logic of this conflict now between Russia and NATO. The Ukrainians are just being used, actually, by both sides in different ways. So that is my take on this particular theme. I don't think we should be completely reductionist about it and say it's just a direct result of capitalist expansion or lack of the ability to expand capital. That is not the case. That is not exclusively the case. There are many, many other factors involved which show how fragile this world is at the moment. And it's also interesting that the attack on democracy also has led to the fact that if you look at the European media, television, mainstream television and press, virtually all the newspapers in the United States and Europe publish exactly the same news, exactly the same images. So ironically, it's like a one-party state, what we're witnessing today. And that will leave an impact because people are not stupid. Many young people don't watch television, for instance, don't read El País or The Guardian or these papers. They don't believe them. But there's nothing to take its place. The internet is not enough. So that is the situation we are in today.